Well, good morning, everyone. This is another example of the strange world that we live in, teaching a class virtually and having things recorded. And I'm not quite sure how you're responding right now. I can't see your facial expressions, but I am really grateful for the opportunity to spend some time with you this morning. Maybe a couple more additional information beyond what Dave shared. I immigrated here when I was 6 years old from Seoul, South Korea. My father was born in what is now called North Korea, and there's a long, complicated story of faith, of persecution, of communism, of fleeing. My father was I believe about 6 or 7 years old when he spent some time in a refugee camp separated from his family. That's a story that I just only recently heard. And to this day, I'm still always learning new things about my parents' story. My wife and I, we have 3 children, and I thought I had a picture of my kids here, but just to bring some visual arts, I don't know if you can see this, but that's a picture of my wife and I. In our traditional Korean wardrobe. And we have 3 children. And as of a couple months ago, we are now empty nesters. Pause for dramatic effect. I'm assuming all of you are giving us a standing ovation at this time. As David shared, I'm now in my, I think, 18th month in the role as president at Bread for the World. You won't know this, but Dave will know that I am sitting in what used to be his office for many, many years. And just grateful for David, his leadership, his legacy, his mentorship over the past year and a half, helping me to transition into this new role in a very challenging time in our nation and world. I thought what I would do is just share a little bit about the task, the question that David has asked me to speak about is religious connections across political divides, and how we're doing this particularly around faith and justice work as we build a larger coalition. And so, my main point here is that in a very polarized time in our nation and in our political landscape, I think it's also really important to acknowledge that we live in a very polarized church as well. And by church, I'm talking about the capital C church and the religious landscape. It's really easy for us, as I'm looking at the Capitol building right now, to just point the finger and say, gosh, we are living in a very politically partisan, polarized world. And it's true, but it's also because we live in a very polarized society. And sadly, the church is actually contributing to that polarization. And so when we often say the church should be the answer, the sad truth is we're not the answer. We're actually very complicit in that polarization. And so imagine the challenge here at Bread for the World. Our tagline is that we are a collective Christian voice urging our lawmakers to help end hunger in our nation and around the world. Now, we don't do direct relief. How we do this work is we're trying to help shape policies and legislation, trying to get to the root causes of poverty. And that's what we do every single day of the year, a collective Christian voice doing advocacy. And yet, the challenge is we're trying to mobilize the capital C church, building a large tent, Catholics, Episcopalians, evangelicals, Presbyterians, mainliners, and the list goes on. And yet we see the church being very polarized and being very divisive during these times. And so it only contributes to the work that we're doing. Part of the reason why we believe that it's really important to get as many people involved in this work, particularly in Congress, is that we believe that sustained progress against hunger and poverty, it requires support from leaders on both sides, from both progressive, liberal, but also conservative people and politicians. And we believe that as a result, our task is to help mobilize, inspire, educate religious people, including those who are from a more conservative bent on their perspective on hunger and poverty. One of the reasons, as I shared earlier, that this is so important is that when we're able to garner bipartisan support, and we've been able to experience this on a smaller level on domestic attempts, but on a larger level from an international perspective, when we can get support from both Republicans and Democratic administrations, not only is it effective in passing a particular bill in that season, but it allows that particular legislation to have long legs or have lasting impact that goes past a current administration to incoming administrations as well. One of the things that we're trying to do is really ask the question, who is bread and what are we about? And I thought it might be good, before I go into a bit more about how we work, to just share with you a process that we have been discussing here at Bread about our values. Who are we and what are we about? As we try to be malleable to the circumstances and the context of our current Congress and administration, the last few years being incredibly challenging. We have been going through this internal process to make sure that we understand who we are, so that no matter what's happening within our context and culture and government, that we can clearly define that these are the values by which we stand. So in no particular order, and we're doing this process, I haven't even shared this with our board per se. They know that we're going through this values process. So we've been having discussions internally as a leadership team, having these discussions with the entirety of our staff. And we're trying to define a set number of values. And I think there are 7 values that we've honed in. And I'll go ahead and share these with you. And I think this will give you a good idea about who Bread is and how we seek to work during this particular time. So the first thing is our faith. We value our Christian faith. We believe our Christian faith is the root of and the foundation for our history, mission, vision, and values. And it compels us to love our neighbor. So Bread for the World isn't just another advocacy organization. We're not just another wonky organization or another policy organization. All of those things have value, but we want to make sure that we understand why we show up to this particular work. It's because of our faith and our faith in Christ. The second thing that we value, again, in no particular order, is justice. And I know that's a very trendy word, very nebulous word, but this is how and why we value justice. We value justice. We seek to establish systems and structures and policies that affirm equality and advance equity amongst diverse people, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or class. The third thing that we value is non-partisanship. We believe that effective and sustainable public policies are made when, in good faith, we employ an unbiased, civil, and bipartisan approach to develop and implement laws and programs to achieve our mission to end hunger. It's really interesting because traditionally, people often look at Bread for the World as a credible organization that works in bipartisan ways. And in the last year and a half, I'm not sure if David ever experienced this during his leadership, but in the last year, we have been hearing from people that the word bipartisan is a really dangerous, tricky, toxic word here in Capitol Hill. It almost speaks to how fast things have changed. It's like code word. And so it's not for that reason, but authentically, our value is we are a nonpartisan org working in bipartisan ways to help advance our mission to end hunger. Our next value that we speak of is human flourishing. We believe that every human being created in the image of God has inherent dignity that affords an inalienable opportunity to be in right relationship with God, self, neighbor, and the environment, and to freely access nutritious food for good health. I love that phrase, human flourishing. I think it's it's a phrase that's used in different circles, not just in religious circles, but also in the larger public sphere. And also one that some folks haven't heard. And so as a result, they're fascinated by this concept of human flourishing. The next value is collective. We value the collective because we recognize that we cannot do this work alone. In the collective, we build power through the collective voice. We accompany those who face circumstances that cause them to experience hunger and poverty. One of the things that I've learned among many lessons is that no one can do this work alone. And everything that Bread does is in coalition and collaboration with other people. And in some ways it makes sense, because as you're trying to help shape policies and legislation, it requires so many voices to be on the same page, amplifying kind of the asks that we are making. The sixth one that I'll share is courage and prophetic voice. We value courage and the prophetic voice. In a spirit of wisdom and love, we will be bold in articulating and pursuing our vision of a world without hunger. That phrase, courage and prophetic voice, I think is kind of an attempt to massage the words that I had been sharing at Red, which is that we need to be faithful in the tension of being both pastoral and prophetic. Having been a pastor of a local church for many, many years, I understand the importance of being pastoral. My critique of my colleagues in ministry, in leadership in the capital C church, is that there's a tendency, a temptation to basically err on one side and resist the other. So for example, we have leaders in the church who are all about being pastoral, the love of God, which is great, but sometimes make the mistake of abdicating, relinquishing the responsibility and the burden of being prophetic as well. And on the flip side, I think we have leaders, particularly during this time where we're elevating the importance of justice and social justice, which is really, really important. But sometimes I see colleagues that are emphasizing our prophetic call to speak truth to power, but we're abdicating, relinquishing the importance of also being pastoral. We abdicate this importance of doing this in a spirit of love. And I truly believe that we need to be about both. And so I love this definition that in a spirit of wisdom and love, we will be bold in articulating and pursuing our vision of a world without hunger. And the last value is integrity and transparency. To simply suggest that we believe in employing open, honest, ethical, unequivocal approaches, methodologies, and strategies above reproach in conducting our business operations and pursuing our mission. Just a little caveat that these are still things that we're working on. They haven't been finalized, but more so than ever, after coming into Bread, I realized that there were so many winds of influence and power and things that were shifting around our times, that rather than trying to help shape things externally, we needed to spend some time really reflecting upon who are we, what are we about, and how are we going to go about the work that we're doing. Some things that give me hope and encouragement during these times is that amid all of the kind of the division and polarizing perspectives and so many things, that the issue of hunger still maintain a level of bipartisan support. In other words, we're still able to engage leaders on both sides. And this is, again, really important to harp on the reason why when there's temptation for folks to just, again, choose their tribe and to work with their people, we think and have a perspective of a long marathon perspective. And for things to last and for legislation to last, we need leaders on both sides of the aisle and independents to work with us. I'll give an example of a few things that we're working on around global nutrition. Bread for the World for numerous years under David's leadership, and as we're continuing this, is really emphasizing the importance of global nutrition. We live in a world right now where every 11 seconds a child dies because of the complexities of malnutrition. It's the #1 killer in our world. We live in a world right now where, because of the exacerbation of COVID, approximately 270 plus million more people have entered into the dangers of food insecurity, malnutrition, and the list goes on. And so a few years ago, we worked on a global nutrition resolution. It didn't have a particular funding amount or a bill associated. It was simply a resolution calling on members of Congress to say that we believe that US should demonstrate leadership in this battle against global nutrition or for global nutrition. And it was one of the most bipartisan resolutions that were signed about 2 years ago and then a year ago. Again, there were some folks that criticized it because they felt like it had absolutely no teeth to it, but there was a strategy behind this particular nutrition resolution. We got so many people to sign on to it, and now a year later, now that we've been able to work on legislation, we're able to go back to every single person that signed that resolution and others to say, Congressperson, senators, you were able to sign this 2 years ago, a year ago. Now we have a bill that we want to be able to share, present to you. Would you be willing to take that next step of leadership and express your support for it? So this past July, the House Foreign Affairs Committee introduced and passed the Global Malnutrition Prevention and Treatment Act. It's HR 4693. It was introduced in this, again, strong bipartisan way. Representative Michael McCloud from Texas. We had Representative Gregory Meeks, a Democrat from New York, Representative Young Kim, a Republican from California, a Korean American, and Representative Chrissy Houlihan, a Democrat from Pennsylvania. And this bipartisan legislation has the potential to impact the lives of tens of millions of women and children around the world. And if I can just give a little bit of a snapshot of what it is so that you understand how important this legislation is. It will show the world what it looks like to prioritize hunger reduction, and even more importantly, to prioritize laying a better foundation for human life, for families, for communities, for nations by prioritizing nutrition. The act will bring greater strategic vision, coordination, effectiveness, and accountability to our existing global nutrition efforts in a way that supports and partners with local and country-led nutrition strategies that allow us to reach more women and children with life-saving nutrition interventions. And then in September, not that long ago, we had honorary bread board member Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, Senator John Boozman, Republican from Arkansas, Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, and Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi. They introduced the Senate version of the Global Malnutrition Prevention and Treatment Act. And along the way, we have got and secured endorsements, not just from these members of Congress, but also influential organizations in the spirit of our value of collaboration and coalition. So we secured endorsements from 1,000 Days, Alliance to End Hunger, CARE, Farm Journal Foundation, Food for the Hungry, Global Health Council, Harvest Plus, Helen Keller International, One Campaign, World Vision US, UNICEF, and the result goes on. And I think in some ways it speaks to the values and the methodology. We're trying to, again, garner that bipartisan support in order for this to have legs, to garner as many people to joining in, and that it is able to have lasting legs beyond changes in Congress or the administration.